Hey everybody, Brayden here. Welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be going over my 11th tournament game. Today I was playing against Jake and he was unrated. And I would actually like to make a correction. In my last video, I stated that 2 out of the 3 opponents that I had in this 4-game tournament, this being the 4th game, that was actually untrue. All 3 previous opponents were unrated, and so was this opponent here, as there was just a bunch of people that were new to chess joining this tournament. So my rating was still 1324 as it was in the tournament. So let's jump into the game and see how it progressed, shall we? Now we see e4 from me. I'm playing with the white pieces, and this is something that I'm just used to playing now. e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5. So this is just going to be a constant for me, playing bishop b5. Bishop to c5 now. Which is a really interesting move. The mainline moves you may see are a6 or knight f6. Bishop c5 has a lot of merit to it, so I wouldn't say there's anything too wrong with it. At least as far as I'm aware, for even top level theory, it's you get a slight advantage at best with white. So let's continue on. Bishop to c5, castles, and knight to d4. Now this was the first interesting move. I'm going to be quite harsh about it. Not because it's my opponent or anything, if they're doing anything wrong, but these knight d4s after bishop b5, I just simply do not believe in. I simply believe that after you take on d4, even if the bishop to c5 move wasn't played, so here, this is actually a common move as well. Even in these positions, I genuinely don't believe in this for black. I think white gets a very good position, and it's very difficult for black to play for the remainder of the game. Anyways, bishop to c5 and castles knight d4. So the most trying move is to take, as you cannot take the e5 pawn because the bishop is hanging. So the best move is to take. And after e takes d4, which is a little interesting, you would expect something like bishop takes, but even bishop takes isn't so great because of c3, bishop goes back, and d4. And as you can see, white has so much more development. White is already castled. White has a pawn or a bishop on b6 and a pawn on e5, but that's all the development they've made. I have a pawn on c3, d4, e4, bishop on b5, and I've already castled. So clearly white has a huge lead in development, and white is much better in this position. But even after e takes d4, you see similar issues. So I went for c3, which I think is completely reasonable. There's also reason to believe that d3 is just as good. And d3 is also maybe even better. It depends on your play style. The reason why this is actually a really good move is because it blocks in this bishop, and the bishop is stuck behind the pawn, where bishop on c5 is normally good, but it's good because it has pressure against f2. In this situation, it's just staring at its own d4 pawn, so you can try to play around that and make this bishop look a little silly. So e takes d4. I played c3 instead, which opens up the bishop, but it gives me a big center. So for example, they played bishop d6, but if they take, then I can take with the b pawn, and I can play the move d4, and I have 2 central pawns, whereas they only have 1 now, and this d4 move is coming with tempo against the bishop, and again I have a huge lead in development, and white is much better in this position. Bishop to d6 instead, which was a little interesting. The issue with this is it does let me take the d4 pawn, and this is something I did in the game, as I think in this type of position there's no reason to allow white to take the d pawn. I think in reality black's only option was to take, or maybe hold on to the pressure, so not take at all, just go like queen e7 maybe, queen e7 and like a knight f6. You can't take the e4 pawn because there's rook e1, but just making a developing move, as if takes, then you can just take, and it's not actually so bad. Even though you don't have a central pawn, there's no d4 coming with tempo against the bishop, so that is a little bit of a different nuance there. So yeah, bishop to d6 unfortunately doesn't make too much sense, because now after c takes d4, I have this huge center. They only have the one piece developed, and it's the same situation I was talking about before, where I'm already castled, I have one piece developed, I have 2 pawns in the center, they don't have any pawns in the center, and they only have 1 piece developed, and they're still 2 moves away from castling. So it's definitely better for white in this position. Queen to f6, and this blunders a piece. So this is showing a sign that maybe my opponent wasn't too prepared tactically as well. The problem is e5 is protected by the other pawn, and it attacks 2 pieces at once. So I'm winning material in this situation after bishop takes, pawn takes, and queen takes e5. And after rook to e1, the queen is now pinned to the king. So unfortunately, there's no queen takes b5 here because the rook could take the king. So it's an illegal move essentially. And after queen e7, rook takes e7, and queen to e2. Clearly, this game is already won for white as long as white just makes reasonable moves, trades pieces off. And this is what I did in the game: c6, bishop to d3, d6, knight to c3. Developing your pieces. When you're up in material, the best thing you can do is get as active as possible because it prevents any possibility of your opponent getting counterplay. In this situation, it wouldn't matter too much anyways because I won the piece with e5, and then I also won the queen for the rook. So I'm up 6 points in material, and unfortunately that's just way too much material in this position. So let's just kind of quickly go through the rest of the game and see what happened. Bishop e6, knight e4, castles b3, developing the pieces, d5, knight to c5, trying to get as active as possible, bishop f5, and then bishop to b2. The whole point is if I take on f5, then that doesn't work, but I could have taken on e7 here, but there's a bit of a trickiness where after takes, then there's a possible like rook e8, and I don't think I wanted to deal with this, but actually, as far as I'm concerned, this wouldn't work anyways, which is quite funny to look at. So I actually just missed in the game that queen takes e7 was possible, but I mean, I'm up so much material anyways. I'm not even too upset that I didn't go for it because a winning position is still a winning position. And even though I could have taken the piece, maybe there's complications I was scared of, and honestly, I'm not gonna beat myself up too much over this. So bishop to b2, and then rook h to e8. Now I can't take on e7. Bishop takes f5, knight takes f5, and queen to g4. We're after g6, queen to b4. So just trying to activate the piece as much as possible, threatening b7. Rook e7, so they saw the threat. Bishop to f6, winning in exchange. Rook e8, bishop takes, rook takes, and h3. Just so there's left, so there's no worries about a back rank checkmate, which was a possible issue that I was kind of scared about around here, when I played bishop to b2 instead of just taking, because the bishop on d3 is defended. And the reason why this is okay for black or for white to take is because after takes, if takes, then there's queen b7 mate. But even if there wasn't in this position, then knight takes d3 still covers e1, so everything would be safe. But okay, bishop to f5, bishop to b2, sorry, going back to the position, and bishop takes h3, b6, and knight to a6, just trying to get more activity. It's a fine move. It might be a little bit weaker compared to something like knight to d3, going for the center instead of just the king, because there's no really direct threats against the king. But knight a6 and c5, so of course I took it, just because in this type of position it just makes sense to take, because it simplifies the game a little bit. The point is, if they take, then I can just take with check, rook c7, and just like a queen takes d5, and I'm up 8 points of material. I gave back the knight for 3 pawns, but the thing is, I still have a rook versus their rook, and it's just a queen versus knight for the imbalances, and still it's a very easy conversion. So rook c7, knight a6, rook c6, and then rook e1. You have to bring in all your pieces. Knight d6, queen to g4 check, f5, queen to g5, knight to f7, and rook to e8 check, with the plan of queen e7 check, and that's what happened in the game. King b7, queen e7, king a6, queen f7, h5, and then rook to e7, trying to take a7, rook c1, king h2, g5, rook takes a7, king b5, a4 check, king b4, queen takes d5, rook to c5, and queen d4 check, king takes b3, rook to e7, so just rerouting my piece and trying to go for a checkmate now, b5, rook e3 check, king to c2, rook c3, rook takes c3, queen takes c3, king d1, a takes b5, g4, b6, g takes h3, b7, king to e2, g takes h3, h4, b8 queen, f4, and queen e8 check. And after king to f1 and queen to c1 check, my opponent resigned, as there's just a mate, and I think they just had enough. Where king to f2, queen to e1, king to f3, and queen to e4, queen 8 to e4 checkmate would be on the board. And yeah, so in this position, right after queen to c1, my opponent resigned. And this wasn't too eventful of a game. There wasn't any, like, it didn't feel like there was too much of a difficulty converting, as shown in the game. Unfortunately, my opponent did miss certain themes and played some interesting moves that just weren't really that great. This knight d4, objectively, the computer, like it'll be slightly worse for black, but unfortunately, after takes and takes, there's always these c3 annoyances and making another move with the piece in the opening, especially. So they developed a piece, which is great. You should be developing your pieces. Knight c6 is a normal move, especially in this position. It's one of the best moves. Knight to f6, people may argue, is better, but it's like one of the two best options. So you're not going to go wrong playing knight c6. And after bishop to c5 and castles, knight d4, the problem with it is you're not developing more pieces. You are just moving the same piece twice. And usually this is a common no-no in chess, where when you're in the opening, you really want to just develop and maximize all of your pieces. And this knight hasn't been developed, and they're not able to castle yet. So a great move here would just potentially be something like knight to f6 or d6 even. d6 is reasonable, but what they really have to do is just prepare the development of either the bishop or just develop their knight, and then there would have been a game. So that does conclude this video and this game. Overall, the thing I would take away from it is don't move the same piece twice in the opening. But I think the title will be Don't Move the Same Piece Twice. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you Monday with my new tournament. And also, actually, one other thing. Now my rating is, I believe, 1288. So I'll put a graph right here. Normally, at the end of a tournament, I like to put a graph, and I almost forgot. But luckily, I just reminded myself in my head. Or I just remembered. Yeah, so here's the graph. And I did lose a little bit of rating because I did have 3 out of 4 against 4 unrated opponents. However, 3 out of 4 is, it's +1. It's not the worst score in the world. And I am getting ready for the next tournament. So I hope you guys enjoyed this analysis. And I will see you Monday with my 4th tournament game. Or my 4th tournament. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.